Very photogenic because I came over straight from work,
That's totally fine.
but I don't care.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. I guess I don't know. I have a suit on in my photo, so I should stick with that sort of serious, sort of academic sort of feel, right?
You know, I think there's some place for that. I just don't allow it to impact me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really that big of a deal, probably. You're number 4, by the way, so maybe get a little bit closer.
I know how to do it. I've used this room for years.
Forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I'm usually on that side, though. I'm quite happy to be on this side.
Right. So welcome to Unscripted with Daniel, and it's so great to have you on, Paul, and we're going to basically answer a few questions that I've had. You sent me so much information, and I've been piling over it and trying to understand the UDO. I've been trying to understand the BZA.
That started out in, I'm fudging some details a bit, but roughly in 1969, when the Cotton family moved to Valparaiso, and the executive director, the leader, they didn't call him anything, was Walt Schreiner. And he just did it as a mission.
Right.
He did that until he died in 2006. And I had been a volunteer since 1991, kind of took over leadership as a volunteer for about 10 years, about 15 years. And then when I retired from my business, I was hired as a part-time director for a ridiculously appealing amount of money to the organization. So overhead has to be paid for, but beyond that, the organization doesn't make any money. But the question was, how do they provide housing?
Right, yeah.
Well, let's start at the beginning. What's necessary when you provide housing? You obviously have to have a piece of land, and you have to have a structure, and you got to have the necessary utilities. Now I'm going to back up a bit.
Okay.
In 1950, the typical new house was a little under 1,000 square feet. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a very basic kitchen, and we built lots and lots of them in the United States. Last year or the year before, the typical new house was somewhere around 2,400 square feet.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a bunch of reasons for it. One reason is that capitalism encourages us to consume. So little by little, we began to add things that we wanted, and they ultimately seemed like they became necessities. Obviously, air conditioning, virtually nobody had air conditioning. Now, that doesn't impact the size of the house.
No.
Great rooms, home offices. So I think we got sold a bill of goods that we needed to have bigger space. By the way, in between 1950 and 2024, the family size declined by 1 whole person. So it went from 3.4 down to 2.4 or something like that.
Seems like the housing size would or should go down as opposed to go up. But there's some other incentives maybe going on here. Like you say, maybe it's capitalism?
Well, so we're talking about a whole bunch of things here, but let's look at it from the professional builder's perspective.
Right.
If you build a house that costs $100,000 and you have 10% profit in it, you make $10,000. If you build a house that costs $300,000, now you have $30,000 profit. So which one are you going to pick?
30,000.
So if the public perceives the need for more, and if the builder is motivated to build bigger, and if the market will support it, what are you going to do? Now, there's another variable. That's the cost of land.
Yeah.
I can only speak from my personal experience. When I started doing this kind of work with Project Neighbors, we bought a standard city lot, which is 66 feet wide and 132 feet deep. And we paid $6,000 for it.
Cheap.
Well,
Compared to now.
I thought it was a lot of money, but that was in 1991. And in about 2021, somewhere in there, we bought exactly the same size lot, equal distance from downtown, and we paid $90,000 for it. So if you're a builder and you've got $90,000 into the lot, you aren't going to build a $150,000 or $175,000 house.
Right.
So all these things kind of team up to dramatically increase the price of housing. And I think I may have sent you this, I may not have sent you this. Starting with 1967 and going to 2024, wages, household income, increased 55%, 1.5 times. The cost of housing increased 1,300%.
That makes it pretty cost prohibitive for the average resident of Valparaiso. You broke down the actual average salary of a Valparaiso resident, and it was only about $50K a year, whereas
Household income.
household household.
Yeah, I think that's
Right.
I think that's up above 60 now. And it depends on what you're looking at. If you look at Porter County, which more affluent people live outside of the city, it's higher. If you look at just the city, I can't remember the numbers now, but we're not real far off.
But the point that you were making is that it's very hard for people of the average income or household income to actually get housing or buy a house. Whereas in the 1950s, you get a stable job, you can easily afford your own home.
Particularly if you're buying in the, I don't know if you're familiar with the neighborhoods, there's a neighborhood called Blaylocks.
I'm not familiar with that.
Blaylocks is, now I have to really dredge up some history here. It's north of where Miller's Market used to be. So you drive east on Lincoln Way and the Dairy Queen's right there. Well, it's north of that. Okay. And Blaylocks was filled with 950 square foot houses. Most of them didn't have garages when they were brand new. And they were the kind of house that a crew of pros could build in a couple or 3 weeks. And they would cost, I can't tell you what 1950 was like, but I know in 1970 or 72, I was building houses like that sold for $29,000.
But these are houses that have existed in Valparaiso, and now
they still exist. Oh, sure.
But to get them built today, are there
nobody
does
Well,
it.
Project Neighbors, Habitat for Humanity, has built a house and a half a year, which brings me to the second, I think, piece of truth, and that is that not-for-profits will not solve the problem.
It just isn't enough.
It's not enough.
And are there certain setbacks with the UDO that prevent those types of houses from being built by actual developers? I know that you gave me information about the UDO a little bit, but for those particular projects that Project Neighbors and Habitat for Humanity are building, do they have to go to the BZA or the Zoning and Appeals?
Board of Zoning Appeals.
Board of Zoning Appeals in order to get those projects approved every time?
Not every time.
Not every time. Okay.
So let's start with some information. The UDO is the Unified Development Ordinance. It is very long and very complex. It first defines zoning districts. A zoning district tells you what you can build and how you can build it.
Right.
So we have in the UDO, I think 5 residential districts. One of them, and I can't tell you the exact name, estates, I think. Big lots, limited to single-family housing. The next category is smaller lots, kind of like the standard 66 by 132, limited to single-family houses. That has been the preference of Valparaiso for a long, long time. And you might ask the question, why? Traditionally, homeowners make more money than apartment dwellers. So if you want an affluent community, you don't want apartment dwellers. Now, we have apartments in Valparaiso. So we've got the big lots, single family, the small lots, single family, and then there's a couple of transitional zoning categories. One is called transition, I think, and that allows, like around the university, it'll allow both residential and commercial buildings.
Oh, okay.
So you can have a little grocery store in a corner, although we don't have any of those anymore, but we did for a long time. And I'm skipping one, but I can't think of what it is. And then there's a category called urban residential. And urban residential allows for multifamily. There's virtually none of that available in Valparaiso.
We need more of it.
The solution is probably not in single-family houses.
Right.
66 by 132 with a moderate-sized house on it gives you a nice-sized backyard, front yard, side yard. One of the things that you have to have is you have to meet parking regulations. So for every single-family house, you have to have 2 off-street parking places. Now, typically, you put that in a garage. But if you're not going to build a garage, you still got to have a piece of concrete or asphalt that will accommodate 2 cars. If you're building an apartment building, 2-bedroom apartments, you still got to have 2 parking places for each apartment. Now, I believe with studio apartments, it goes down to 1.5 parking place for every unit.
Okay.
So, and of course, if you go to Chicago and you're visiting somebody who lives close in, you know you can't find any parking.
Right.
And that's a legitimate concern. But we have to strike a balance between the chaos of Chicago and the fact that in Valpo, we allocate an awful lot of land for cars and less for people. Yeah. Well, not less for people, but it is a cost to accommodate parking.
I think that you can preserve the look of Valpo still and also have affordable housing with more dense units.
I don't think there's any question.
Right.
But I'll return to my previous statement.
Okay.
Not-for-profits aren't going to do it.
Absolutely,
Project Neighbors, the last couple of years I was involved, each year we built a 1,200 square foot house. 1,200 square feet is bigger than what we had in 1950. It's small by today's standards, but you get 3 bedrooms, you get a bathroom, maybe a bathroom and a half, you get a nice kitchen, dining area, living room, everything you'd want. Everything that I think is really necessary. But we didn't have to make a profit. Right. Now, and we built one 2 years ago, and we built one last year. The one we built 2 years ago, the building permit was $10,000. The total cost, excluding land, because we had already owned the land, was $105,000. Wow. The building permit was almost 10%. Now, that's not always the case, and I've never figured out why that one was that expensive. It depends on utilities. It depends on a lot of variables. If you're a builder, what incentive do you have? If the market will buy your $350,000 or $450,000 or $550,000 big house, what incentive is there for you to build smaller ones, particularly if the land's expensive? Well, that incentive has to come from somewhere, and that's the G word.
Okay, government.
Government. Right. If government wants to attack this problem, if it wants a diverse population, if it wants the people that work in the shops downtown, if it wants the tradesmen, the landscapers, the roofers, the people who make $15, $20 an hour to live in Valparaiso, then it has a motivation to provide incentives. Now, what's it? Well, an incentive is real simple, right? It's money.
Right.
So you can discount the building permit. You can streamline the process. Going to the BZA, unless you know how to do it, it's going to cost you $1,000. If you don't know how to do it and you hire an attorney, it's going to cost you another $5,000. You don't do that if you're trying to build under $200,000 housing. You just don't do it. Now, I'm going to come out and say, from a builder's perspective, it's really not possible to build anything much cheaper than $150,000 or $175,000, even if it's scaled back, bare bones, basic small housing. Not-for-profits can do it because they use volunteers and because they're tax exempt, don't have to pay 7% on everything they buy.
Right.
But a builder's got to support, it's got to make some profit, it's got to pay the help, it's got to pay the sales tax. So to do what Project Neighbors has done is probably not on the table, except for a house every year. Maybe we tried to build duplexes when we could, but that was a zoning dependent thing.
Yeah. And
when we went to the BZA, we did it without attorney's help because we had a lot of experience.
Right. You've been doing it for years.
Been doing it for years, and the acknowledgement of the problem, as far as the local city government is concerned, just happened. Now, they had housing studies that date back 25 years that said Valparaiso needs more low-cost housing. But the political will was not there.
What allowed local government to come to their senses on this particular problem?
Well, a lot of things. When you are precluding restaurant servers and roofers, nobody cares because those folks don't have any clout. When you are precluding firefighters and teachers, all of a sudden there's a different body of people out there complaining. When the problem becomes acknowledged in the national press, which of course it is now, it's hard to hide from it. Even though all these studies indicated there was a need, those studies got buried, hidden.
Because not enough people spoke out about it.
That's right.
That's basically it.
That's right. And for years, we talk about local government, we're talking about John Costas, because for the last 26 years or so, he's been mayor almost all the time, except for the 4 years that Matt Murphy was mayor. He touted the good work of not-for-profits, essentially saying, well, we don't have a problem here because we got these wonderful not-for-profits and they're doing this work. And they were, but they weren't even getting close to meeting the need.
Right. And the stats showed that it wasn't nearly enough. I haven't looked at the studies, so if you have information on those.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I usually come with my full brain, and that's Larry Boss. Do you know Larry?
Yeah.
Larry is a retired political science professor, and data is his thing. Yeah. And he remembers all these statistics. But the most recent study said something about 300 units. Now, I could be wrong. That number maybe is one that I'm just conjuring up. But it was a substantial number. And we're talking about units for the lowest incomes in Valparaiso. So it was very substantial. And now the city has built 5. They created Paradise Homes, and a not-for-profit connected to the city. Bill Oding, the city administrator, worked to create that, because the city itself can't build and can't own housing, or they can, but they choose not to. So they created another not-for-profit, and they purchased 5 pieces of property and worked with a builder, and they're going to come in under $300,000.
Well, that's good.
Well, it's good, but we had families struggling when the price tag was $110,000. Part of that was the dramatic increase in interest rates because Project Neighbors always borrowed the money to build the houses.
Yeah, $300K is a big difference.
Difference.
That's nearly 200 or more.
I think realistically, if you can get a builder to build a small house for $175,000, you're doing something impactful.
That is pretty good.
There will still be people who can't afford it.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't mind, let's go ahead and take a little bit of a break, a little bit of a breather, and then we're going to come back with some other questions. I need to use the bathroom.
That's a good reason.
Notice me squirming, maybe. All right, we'll be back. All right, we're back. I want to go ahead and start with a question about the BZA, I believe. So this is in the context of putting something forward to the BZA. Like, let's say that you have a property that you're bringing forward and asking that it be appealed. Let's say it was 1,000 square feet under the minimum amount.
Yeah, yes, there is a minimum, yes. 5,000 square foot lot is the smallest that you can build on in Valparaiso. I did go to the BZA to request a variance to build on a lot that was 4,700 square feet, and I got it.
Okay.
More recently, we owned a piece of ground on Monroe Street, and we wanted to put a 3-unit building on it. All that was permitted was a single family or a duplex. We were turned down. Actually, we wanted to put 4 units on it. We were turned down. There was opposition from an adjacent neighbor. We kind of worked out with the neighbor that we'll put 3 units on it. And we went back and we got it. That was a year and a half later.
Okay. Sounds like it was a long fight, though.
Well, it's always it's always somewhat of a fight. Now, remember, when we go in as the good guys because we're doing this as a not-for-profit. We're trying to serve the poorer parts of our community, and there are members of the BZA who are sympathetic to that. But there is an underlying body of belief in Valparaiso that we would like to keep an affluent community. And I'm not going to accuse anybody of being racist, but there is a history in Valparaiso of, when the Cotton family moved here, they had to have overnight guards on the house. The letters to the editor, if you read them, from 1969 was that Walt Schreiner had destroyed Valparaiso, ruined it because of the first black family.
Because of one black resident.
That's what he. I mean, he did not solicit them. She wanted to move to Valparaiso. He said, "You'd be crazy to move to Valpo." At the time, there was one full-time black resident. It was a university sociology teacher, and he had to live in a university-owned, abandoned fraternity house because there was no other housing available to him. So this was a town that was actively racist in 1969.
Because of the color of his skin,
yes.
no one would house him. He was not permitted to even have housing if he could afford it.
Well, let me tell you the story. When Walt and Lois Schreiner and their supporters, who were primarily university people, realized that Barbara Cotton desired to leave Cabrini Green in Chicago and move to a nice, peaceful little place like Valpo where her kids would be safe. They tried to rent an apartment for her. Nobody would rent. So they pooled their money for a down payment and they had an agreement to purchase a small house. I believe it was on Union Street. On the day of closing, the closing agent announced that someone had purchased the property paying cash out from underneath them, in effect. Walt, who owned a house in Valpo and the adjacent empty lot, resolved that he would build a house. He did. He lived on a gravel road. If my brain was functioning, I could tell you the name of the street, but it's not very far from here. After the house was complete, the city of Valparaiso said, according to our zoning ordinance, you have to be on a paved road. Well, clearly it was a dead-end street. They were at the end of the street. Well, it was only maybe a block and a half long. It was all gravel until you got to, well, it was all gravel. But in order to get an occupancy permit, they had to pave 66 feet of road, put in curbs and pave it. So there was opposition to opening Valparaiso up to diversity. Now, is that still the same today? Absolutely not. Are there remnants of desire for Valpo to be the small, homogeneous farming community that it was in the mid-'60s? Yes. So again, you go to the BZA and you got a lot of things going on.
Right.
One is you have neighbors who say, I think what you're doing is really great, but couldn't you do it somewhere else?
Not in my backyard.
Yeah, the NIMBY crowd. And then you have legitimate UDO regulations. Side yard that has to be so big, you have to landscape it in such and such a way. And these are just things that basically add to the cost. And then there's the whole zoning thing. You can't put 3 units if only a duplex is allowed. And that was the big one that we had to get over, because a 3-unit costs less per unit if it's all under one roof.
Right.
So all of that requires attention to detail, and it requires the political winds to soften a bit. Most of the time we'd win in front of the BZA because we represented something that there was broad appeal to people's sympathies, but not necessarily to the ruling elite.
Right. And I'd imagine if a private citizen, maybe some builder who doesn't have experience with that, maybe couldn't articulate as well around these sort of policies.
It takes practice.
It takes practice.
It takes practice. I'm hesitating. What really needs to happen is there has to be acknowledgement of the huge need, and the UDO has to accommodate that. And there has to be not only that accommodation in the UDO, but there has to be some motivation, some incentives for builders to do it. And there has to be a source of property. Now, we know that the RDC, the Redevelopment Commission, which is a branch of city government, has a huge budget from property taxes. And their mission is to buy blighted property and to get it back on the tax rolls. Well, they have done that over and over and over for commercial development. They've rarely done it for residential development. And oftentimes they would do it at a loss. To promote a business moving in, they would buy a piece of property that at one time had a factory on it. Now the factory's not there anymore and the building has gone to seed. So they'd buy that property and see if they could find a tenant, particularly a commercial tenant, to take on that piece of property. And they would provide incentive for that. Now, the incentive could be that the price was well below market, or the incentive could be tax abatements. The city council grants tax abatements to businesses that want to expand all the time. They did it just 2 weeks ago to a business called, the memory is not going to work. But it's a small business that wanted to add 12 employees, and they were going to build a big building.
Right. So they'll do it for commercial businesses, but they haven't done it with residential units?
Not as a rule. Now,
as much.
They may have been involved in the purchase of the property that the parking garage is on.
Okay.
And again, they may have. I don't know if that went through the RDC or not. But the RDC is a vehicle that could facilitate the acquisition of more affordable residential property and then facilitate incentives for builders to embrace that particular task rather than going out into the county and building the $450,000, $550,000 big houses. If there is a will to do it, there certainly are mechanisms to put that together.
There's certainly the money to make that incentive through.
I think so. I think
there's a lot of goodwill too.
Well, there's more now than there has been in the past.
Yeah.
This housing challenge in America is not going to be quickly or easily solved, because if you look at income growth in the country, I'm showing you this, and we're on radio, so it won't be very effective. This is a very interesting graph, and it takes all the incomes and divides them into quintiles. A tenth, the lowest tenth, the next highest tenth, the next highest tenth. If you look at the bottom of the graph, you'll see that the lines are pretty flat, aren't they? Mm-hmm. That's income growth over the years. If you look at the top lines, you see that they've dramatically gone up.
I see.
So what we have is we have dramatic income increases at the high end, and really it's pretty flat at the low end. So we have a population that can afford expensive housing.
Right.
And builders are apparently keeping busy accommodating those needs, and they're not incentivized to address the lower incomes.
It really just looks like it could be a graph of what builders focus on.
I don't think there's any question.
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind that what I see being built is stuff that the folks I grew up with, and certainly my generation, could not have afforded.
Mm-hmm. Now, another question about the fees of the BZA. So for a regular person coming in and say they were to do it themselves, they don't get a lawyer, is $1,000 the highest amount that it takes?
Well,
or what is the
there's a
variance
flat
there?
fee depending on what you're asking for. If you're asking for a variance from standards, from UDO standards, I think it's $250. If you're asking for a use variance, so you got a piece of property that is zone one thing and you want to use it for something else, that's a use variance. I think it's another $100. And then you have to send certified letters to everybody that lives within X number of feet of the property. And let's say it's a dense area, so you might have to send out 50 or 60 letters certified, and each of those cost $4 or $5 a piece. So now we've spent, say, $300 and then another $300 or $400 for that. And somehow I ended up with about $1,000. It's probably less than $1,000, but if you're paying somebody to do it, like an administrative assistant, there's that cost too, because it takes some time.
Right.
So for under $1,000, you can go represent yourself at the BZA. Again, the figure that I have heard for a small project is a $5,000 fee from attorneys. If you're doing a big project, a team of attorneys will spend 6 months preparing, and it's going to cost you a lot more than $5,000. Now we're talking about the link, the variances that they got. And they got a lot of variances for that.
So I think that makes it seem like it's going to be hard to go against or to go to the boarding zones of appeals, and that instead a better path would be, like you said, go through the RDC, get reform there, and get reform through maybe the UDO.
Well, the UDO smooths the path. The RDC makes property, it can make property more affordable, cheaper. The two different obstacles, the price of ground and the UDO is an obstacle, and the price of ground is an obstacle. Those two entities can be, if they're motivated, can change them. But there has to be political will, and that depends on who we vote for.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I think you kind of covered this, but in the context of the BZA and its sort of general decision making, you say that it's sort of swayed by the city?
Now, I'm not an insider.
Okay.
There are 5 members to the BZA. You need 3 votes to pass, to get a variance. When we have lost, my suspicion is that there were conversations. If the city supports it, years ago, Bill Oding, this was in Costas's previous terms, and I think it was for this building. We're in a building that was built for HealthLink. When they moved to Sturdy Road, Project Neighbors purchased the building back and wanted to convert it to 18 small studio apartments. We didn't have adequate parking. Bill Oding stood up in front of the BZA and said, the city supports this variance. That's huge. People are going to talk about things even if they're officially not supposed to. I think there is a sense of what the city supports and what the city doesn't support in the minds of the BZA members. Again, I'm not an insider, so I don't know that for a fact. The individual who is presenting it makes a big difference. If they're known, if they're trusted, I think that makes a big difference. Eventually, you get known, and if you have a track record of doing certain kind of work, then they're willing to be flexible.
I see.
I think the BZA is very willing to be flexible. But when you're asking big time, you're asking for big variances, number of units, putting a multi-unit building in a residential neighborhood, in a single-family neighborhood. Those are big asks.
Yeah.
They have to be very willing or very flexible, or there has to be a push from the city administration in order to get it. You have to do your homework. You have to know who you're dealing with. You have to hope. Whenever I went to a BZA meeting and walked in, I hoped the room was empty. If there was a crowd there, unless I had put the crowd there.
Right.
There were people who didn't want it.
Right.
And they would stand up and they would say, we have too much traffic in our neighborhood already. There's not enough parking, blah, blah, whatever the reasons. And the BZA members are very sensitive to that.
Yeah.
So all those things play in it. It's an interesting drama. One could make a TV series out of it if you wanted to. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. There's I guess a lot. They don't want to have a PR nightmare, essentially.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't want, the BZA doesn't want to come out and be the bad guy.
Right.
And that's happened in the past.
So maybe they've agreed to a appeal, and then the residents around them get very angry, and then the BZA is like, okay, we learned our lesson in a way, right?
That's right. Now, one time we went to the BZA, and this is a very complicated one. It was during COVID, and they didn't hold the session in City Hall. They had to move it to the Butterfield Pavilion. And we were applying for variance to build what is now being built, just a few blocks from here. Are you familiar with it's called The Crossing?
No, what is that?
Okay, it's a 24-unit studio apartment building.
Okay.
It's being built on the corner of Nickel Plate and Axe Avenue. The building just went up in the last 2 weeks. It's been 8 years in the planning. We initially had a piece of property on North Franklin Street that had been donated. And we went to the BZA to get a variance to put 18 units on it. I didn't think we could, 24 at the time. It wasn't a very big piece of property. Mm-hmm. It was zoned commercial, so that meant a use variance and a whole lot of other things. The city did not want us there. Absolutely did not want us there. The city attorney did something that I'd never seen done before. Just before, this story gets even more complicated. All
Interesting.
right, let me back up.
Okay.
Remember the 3-unit building, the 4-unit building we wanted to build? Before the vote came up, the city attorney stood up and said, this petition does not meet the legal standards. We never found out what he meant by that. We lost that one by a vote of 3-2, 3 negative, 2 in favor. There was outrage. The room was full. The outrage was that the city attorney had done that because it had never happened before. It is for the BZA members to make the decision whether that petition has legal standing. So when we got to the second piece of property where we wanted to build this studio apartment building, the whole audience stood up one at a time and got in line and spoke in favor of it. And it passed, even though the city attorney again stood up and said this petition doesn't meet legal standards. So we got the variance we wanted, and then the neighbor to the north decided to sue the BZA to overturn their decision. We defended our position and we won in court. And the city then communicated, you don't want to build there. You don't want to build there.
Well, you went through all this process. Of course you do, but...
Well, okay, we weren't moving out of town. We were going to continue to have to function here. The city wanted that property. They did not want that housing there. They didn't make a threat. They simply said, you don't want to build there.
Well, what's going to happen if you did?
Good question. Maybe we'd never get a positive BZA vote. Maybe the cost of our building permits would go up. I'm using my imagination, and somehow I'm engaging this conspiratorial attitude on the part of the city. I could be wrong. The city made a convincing case. They said, look, we'll buy the property at market rate from you, and we'll help you find another piece of property, which they did. They bought it, and 3 or 4 years later, I got a phone call from Bill Oding saying that the Ralston property, which is the one on Nickel Plate and Axe, has just come up for sale. Make your offer, I think they'll take it.
Okay.
And they did. And it worked out very, very well because it's a much bigger piece of property, and we're going to do 24 units there. But there was a lot of drama to get to that point, and it wasn't fun. We went through at least 4 different pieces of property before we found one that we could afford. We thought we could get through the BZA, and we did get through the BZA because that was zoned industrial, and we had to get a use variance for it. But by then, the moon and the sun had lined up, and everybody was in favor. Let's give them this and get it off the table. So there is a political drama that's always in play when you're talking about housing in Valparaiso. Now you go to LaPorte. It's got a Republican administration, but the mayor there has been pushing hard for more affordable housing. It's just a completely different kind of community. And I can't explain all that. I'm not smart enough to understand. I live in Valpo. I love it here. It's a great town.
Right.
It's a town that likes what it was and doesn't want to see a lot of change, although we're seeing an awful lot of change.
We are. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for coming in and talking about what Project Neighbors is doing and generally affordable housing and how we can, specifically in Valpo, maybe get to a place where more needs of more quintels are being served. And
Can I add one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
Just so there's no confusion, because this happened on Facebook. I retired from Project Neighbors in January of this year, and there's a new leadership team that are charging on, and I think they're doing a good job, and I think their motivations and their missions have not changed one bit.
And what's her name?
Carmen is her first name.
Carmen
Vincent is the executive
Vincent.
director, and there's some other people. There's still a board of directors that hasn't significantly changed. But they now have I was part-time. She's a full-time executive director, and they've added a couple other employees. So hopefully they can I think I did a lot, but I wasn't a detail person. I let a lot of things go. They now have the people that can really attend to detail. That's great.
That is great. Again, thank you for coming on.